All right, so in this video, we're going to look at the final model that we use in digital solutions, that being a class diagram. So a class diagram is a bit different to the previous models we've looked at, in that being use case diagram, activity diagram, and data flow diagram. In that those diagrams are examples of what we call behavioral diagrams. So looking at how the system will behave or act, whereas a class diagram is what we call a structural diagram. So we're starting to actually look at the structure of our particular code or prototype that we're developing. So by default in Star UML, our main model is a class diagram. But if we don't have the class diagram elements in the toolbox in the bottom left hand corner, it's as simple as going to model, add diagram, and it's the first one on the list. So we can get a new class diagram, but as I said, I'm going to use the main default model because it is set up as a class diagram. So the key to putting together a class diagram is it should incorporate all of the details of our activity diagrams, as well as our data flow diagram. And in that sense, what we're referring to is the data objects, or the particular bits of information, the nouns in our data flow diagram. They're going to form part of our data objects, or our data classes, to use the blueprint generic term. And our activities, so both in terms of the user activities and the data activities, they should appear within our class diagram as methods. My apologies there, spoke out the term. So to create our class diagram, we're going to start by using a class object, I suppose, to just confuse everyone, and add that in. And so the name of our classes is just going to be those objects that we've been referring to. So we've got assessment tasks. Assessment task is one. We've got homework tasks. All right, so we also probably need to consider user accounts. So we've got three objects there. I know we didn't cover too many user accounts in the data flow diagram, but we have talked about the entities accessing it, and we may want them to have some sort of account that they can link into. I guess that was covered a bit when we said that the parents and teachers want to be able to check the student plan. We need to have information on those particular students. All right, so in each of our objects, we have two additional sections underneath the title. So the middle band, or the middle section, is used for the attributes of the object. So the information or the specific data we want to collect on those particular objects. The bottom section is for the methods, or in Star UML, these are called operations. So they're the actions that are applied to these objects. So to add an attribute or a method to the object, we just simply select the object, right click, and then add. And then we've got attribute to add an attribute. And as I said, the methods in Star UML are called operations. So if we can add in an attribute, we'll also add in an operation. You can see where they sit within the particular object class in the class diagram. So as I said, now the job is to go through and work the attributes and methods. So the way I like to approach this is just to put everything that we can possibly think in terms of attributes. So for our assessment task, we probably want to know what subject it is. To add in additional attributes, once we've added in the first one, we can right click and add another one. But you also have the option of when you're editing it to press the plus button and it will add additional attributes in. So as you're going in on a flow, it's a bit easier to add in those attributes. So maybe the title of the assessment is something we need to know. We need to know the due date of the assessment. All right, you know, maybe conditions, like so we can add that in. We can always refine it later. So we've got those things. Now what we want to do is look at adding the methods. And as I said, with the methods, we want to make sure that all these processes in our data flow diagram, all processes in our activities are included within the class diagram. So in terms of the assessment, we talked about adding an assessment task. So viewing the assessment task is due. You'll notice as we're adding these in that StarUML adds a set of parentheses or round brackets to each one. And that's just the terminology that we tend to use when we're developing our solution to say that this is a function or a method. So when we're coding it, we can pass parameters, that sort of thing through it. So we may also want to complete an assessment task. So I know we talked about being able to tick off an assessment task. And that's going to be a variation of an update. So we want to be able to update that the assessment task is complete. Just going to have a quick review. So check off assessment tasks we've got, add assessment dates we've done, view them. So remind is something we haven't addressed. So go back to our class diagram. Double click and just use the plus. So yeah, we'll just call it remind date. Again, we'll probably refine these method names going forward just because that's really long to have to code every time we want to do it. All right, so we do the same thing for each other task. So I'll just quickly do the homework tasks and user accounts. Again, the subject, the title of the homework task, the due dates. Well, you know, we may want the date given as well for homework. So it's like, well, what was the homework we got on Thursday? Sorry, clicking on the part, and add the attribute. So I guess the actual task, it's task details perhaps. Again, in terms of the attribute. So if you do add an attribute and you don't want it, you can double click and the cross will delete it, or obviously you can see Control Delete on the keyboard will do the business as well. So we want to add in an operation to add homework. That might be a nice way. So view homework. So complete homework. And maybe another remind for homework. And then the user account. So with this, I guess, you know, we probably want a username, a password, maybe a full name. What else do we want? I guess the type of user as well, because we do have a few different types of users. All right, so we'll start with that, and we can obviously branch out as we go through. And so their operations, so view student planner. I guess everyone would be looking to do that. Maybe add tasks. There's one, so we'll just quickly go back through. So we've got the reminders, we've covered that. Oh, so our user login, we haven't discussed that yet. So displaying the reminders. So I guess, are there reminders and display reminders is probably in that reminds when they log in, it's going to remind the users of that. So perhaps we even need to look at removing that from these particular objects and passing them to the user, because it's probably going to be user specific rather than task specific. So you can see we're developing our idea as we go. This is all great stuff to annotate about as we work through this. So let's delete them. So let's add another, there we go, add another one. So remind about the tasks. What else do we have in our again, we haven't actually put in the login. Keep clicking the wrong thing. So login, that's a method. So displaying the reminders, displaying the due dates. So we've got that in for the particular tasks. User type. So again, we can assign these different actions to different users, which we'll talk about in probably the next bit. So user input confirm. So we've got the user input, we need that confirmation. So displaying the task and confirming its input, and then adding it to the system, which we've already got. So again, for these ones, we'll just come back, add in a method to confirm details. A little bit sloppy here. Add an operation. So confirm homework. So we've got our objects in place. The last thing we want to do is look at their associations. So you can see there's a list of different relationship types here. The most basic is what we call an association. So where there's any two objects that have a relationship, we want to make sure they're connected up. So in this case, I'm just going to move the user accounts down here, because the assessment tasks and the homework tasks are tied together to the user, in the sense that, the user is the one adding the homework task or the assessment task. So we want to be able to say that this user has added this assessment task. So there's an association between those objects. What we should find, if we're doing our class diagrams correctly, is that all of our objects ultimately connect together. There shouldn't be any loose objects off to the side that don't have an association with the other objects. If we do, we need to go back and have another look at a bit more analysis of our system and how everything works together. And then, yeah, if we find it's the case that it doesn't really have any association, well, then the question is, does it actually belong in the system, or is it part of a different system that's external to our particular system? All right, so once we've got to this stage, we've got our first draft of our class diagram. We can save our work as per usual. Evaluate it, thank you. You can also export it as a diagram. So, the student class diagram. And now we've got that saved, we can add that to our documentation, again annotating some of those adjustments and changes made on the fly. So the next step in the process, once we've got the class diagram, is to look at normalizing the data. So we'll have a separate video for that because it is a bit of a detailed process, where we look at, I guess, trying to optimize our data so that we're not repeating data and increasing or optimizing, again, to use that word, our data reliability, integrity, and validity.